Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission is to take the complex, sprawling source material from the most consequential global events and distill it into the essential knowledge you need to be truly well-informed.
And today, we are definitely diving deep. We're looking at an event that, well, it feels like it's straight out of a political thriller.
It really does. We are dissecting a moment that experts believe fundamentally redefines the rules of international coercion.
That's right. We're talking about the reported covert capture of Venezuelan strongman Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, in the heart of Caracas on January 3rd, 2026.
An absolutely stunning development. And this operation, it has a few names floating around, right?
Yeah, you'll see it referred to as Operation Absolute Resolve or sometimes Midnight Hammer. But whatever you call it, it is so much more than just a dramatic headline.
Right. It's a live-action, high-stakes demonstration of a whole new military doctrine, one that seems to integrate the precision of special operations forces with the incredible reach of cyber warfare.
Exactly. And that integration is the core of what we need to unpack today.
So let's talk about our sources for this. They're pretty comprehensive. We've synthesized political and economic analysis detailing just the spectacular collapse of Venezuela under Maduro.
And it's not just about the collapse, but also the intense challenges of, what comes next. How do you even begin to draft a roadmap for democratic renewal after something like that?
And we have the military analyses, which are fascinating. They compare this unprecedented raid to past high-value target missions, and the big one everyone's talking about is the 2011 bin Laden operation.
A natural comparison, but as we'll see, a flawed one in many ways. And crucially, we have detailed doctrinal material. This is the really dense stuff, illustrating the integration of U.S. Special Operations Forces, SOF, with cutting-edge cyber and space capabilities.
That's the technological foundation that, made a mission like this even conceivable.
It is. And finally, to give it all context, we contrast this rapid, overwhelming unilateral action in Caracas with a proposed hypothetical, and I want to stress, hypothetical cooperative roadmap for dealing with a similar ongoing hybrid threat, the U.S.-Mexico cartel crisis.
So two very different approaches to a similar kind of problem.
Exactly. The hammer versus let's say, the slow architectural rebuild.
Our core mission today, then, is to understand the scope of this Caracas shockwave. How did this happen? What military and technological shifts did it showcase? And what does it tell us about how states are now confronting these hybrid threats?
These situations where criminal networks, deep-seated corruption, and state power are all just inextricably intertwined.
Exactly. The lessons here, and this is what we want you to take away, are not just about Venezuela. They are about the future of global power projection.
So let's get into it.
Let's start with the political context.
Right.
Because to truly grasp the significance of, literally extracting a sitting head of state from his capital, you have to understand the level of systemic failure that came first.
You absolutely do. We're talking about Nicolás Maduro's 12-year reign. And it's a period that saw Venezuela, a country with just immense resources, descend into a full-blown humanitarian disaster.
It's one of the great cautionary tales, isn't it?
Yeah.
The modern petrostate gone wrong.
It really is. Venezuela sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves. That's not an exaggeration. It's a geological fact. Reserves that should have guaranteed stability, prosperity, a good life for its citizens.
You went the other way.
Completely the other way. Maduro's authoritarian mismanagement transformed the nation into what the sources describe as an economic black hole. And the scale of the collapse, it's genuinely hard to overstate.
So when we talk about collapse, we're not talking about a standard recession or even like a bad depression. This was something else entirely.
This is a complete structural failure, a hollowing out of an entire country driven by a combination of, ideological rigidity, breathtaking corruption, and just sheer incompetence.
What are some of the metrics that really illustrate this?
Yeah.
This economic annihilation?
Well, you can look at two critical areas: inflation and production. First, inflation. The country suffered years of hyperinflation that soared into the millions of percent.
Millions. It's a number that doesn't even feel real. What does that actually mean for a person on the street?
It means the concept of money ceases to exist. It's not just that your savings are eroding. It means the cash in your wallet from the morning is worthless by the afternoon. The bolivar, their currency, was rendered so useless that people resorted to weighing stacks of it instead of counting it.
So you're forced into bartering or using foreign currency if you can even get it.
Exactly. The US dollar became the only real store of value, which of course most people didn't have access to. So you had this bizarre, desperate economy of bartering for, a bag of flour or a few eggs.
And at the same time, the source of all that potential wealth, the oil, was just drying up.
It was. The state oil company, PDVSA, which was once this, crown jewel of the nation, was systematically hollowed out. It was staffed with loyalists instead of engineers. Corruption siphoned off billions. So production just collapsed.
From what to what? Do we have numbers on that?
Yeah, we're talking about a country that 2 decades ago was producing over 3 million barrels per day. Under Maduro, that plunged to near historical lows, sometimes struggling to produce even 500,000 barrels. They were wasting this immense resource potential, letting the infrastructure literally rust away.
So a nation sitting on a sea of oil couldn't even keep the lights on or feed its people.
That's the devastating reality. The source material uses this really powerful, visceral analogy for it. It says the state became a house with gold in its basement, but no electricity upstairs.
Wow.
All that wealth, all that potential was either physically locked away in the ground, mismanaged into oblivion, or just straight up siphoned off by the ruling elite. And that left the general population in these chronic, agonizing shortages of food, medicine, and basic utilities like running water and power.
And the human cost, that systemic failure, that's maybe the clearest indicator of the regime's criminality, right?
Right.
It leads directly to the humanitarian crisis.
Absolutely. The displacement crisis is historic. We're talking over 7 million Venezuelans. That's roughly a quarter of the entire population have fled the country.
A quarter of the population.
A quarter. That makes it the largest displacement crisis in the entire history of the Western Hemisphere. It surpasses the numbers we saw from the Syrian civil war at its peak.
And these aren't just, economic migrants looking for a better job. These are refugees.
These are families escaping a failed state apparatus. They're fleeing hunger, a collapsed healthcare system, and brutal political repression.
And politically, this entire collapse was sustained by dissolving democracy itself. It wasn't a functioning system that failed. It was an apparatus of authoritarian control that Maduro built and perfected.
That's a crucial point. The foundational institutions were systematically dismantled. The judiciary, the electoral council, the state media, all of them were hollowed out of any independence or integrity.
So they stopped being checks on power.
They stopped being checks on power, and they became, as one analyst put it, mere stage props. They were used to provide this thin, flimsy veneer of legitimacy to elections that were widely seen as stolen or fraudulent.
That's how we survive.
Maduro's survival hinged entirely on maintaining the perception of his absolute power and eternity. He did that through coercion, through fear, and through total control of information.
Which brings us then to the Caracas operation. This was an unprecedented act of extraterritorial state coercion, but it was framed by the U.S. not as an act of war, but as, of all things, law enforcement. Walk us through that legal fulcrum.
That framing is the entire ballgame. It's either a piece of strategic genius or a dangerous legal overreach, depending on your perspective. The operation, reportedly carried out by U.S. Delta Force operators with, and this is critical, crucial internal intelligence support, was designed to enforce the long-standing 2020 U.S. Department of Justice indictments.
Right, I remember those. Those indictments accuse Maduro of being far more than just a typical dictator.
Yes. They leveled charges of narco-terrorism, cocaine trafficking, and weapons offenses. The core accusation was that Maduro had transformed the Venezuelan state itself into what the prosecutors explicitly called a cartel with flags.
A cartel with flags. That's a powerful phrase.
It is. And by pursuing him under U.S. criminal law, the administration sought to bypass all the messy legal ambiguities of a state-on-state military action. The argument became, we are invading a country, we are arresting a wanted international criminal who just happens to be a head of state.
So the operation was fundamentally an arrest warrant, albeit one that required, an industrial-level military deployment to actually execute.
A very, very well-armed posse, yes.
Tell us about the operation itself. What did the sources say made it so precise?
The reports all describe a surgical intervention. It was optimized for speed and discretion. It was executed under the cover of darkness around 2 a.m. local time, and it relied heavily on that sophisticated intelligence to ensure they knew exactly where Maduro and Flores were sheltering.
So the goal was always extraction, not occupation. Get in, get the targets, get out.
Exactly. The high precision and the reliance on things like stealth helicopters and specialized ground teams, that was all designed to minimize the risk of a sustained firefight or, any significant collateral damage. That was crucial for avoiding a wider conflict in the middle of the capital.
And now the couple is reportedly en route to New York to face those sealed indictments. The symbolism of that, just the images of that transfer, it must be massive, particularly inside Venezuela.
Oh, the domestic symbolism cannot be overstated. For 12 years, Maduro cultivated this image of invincibility, of being internally untouchable behind the walls of Miraflores Palace. This capture shatters that myth of eternity.
Because authoritarian regimes run on that myth, right? The idea that they will last forever.
They run on it. When that illusion of eternal power collapses, the entire system of coercion starts to lose its psychological hold, and history just accelerates. This signals to every general, every bureaucrat, every loyalist in the regime that their protection is conditional, not absolute. The game has changed.
But the statue is down. But as the sources caution, removal is not renewal. And the immediate danger, the thing everyone fears, is the power vacuum.
The ghost of Libya, the ghost of Iraq.
Exactly. So how do the analysts suggest navigating that immediate post-Maduro environment, citing those harsh lessons?
That lesson, the danger of a political vacuum, is absolutely paramount in all the analysis. The number one priority is the rapid, managed establishment of a legitimate governing body.
You can't just leave a void.
You can't. The roadmap the sources propose requires 3 distinct and somewhat overlapping phases, starting with phase 1, the immediate formation of an interim government.
But who are the key figures identified for this kind of transition? It can't just be anyone.
No, the interim administration needs instant, broad, international recognition. That means it has to be led by internationally recognized opposition figures. The sources specifically mention 2 names, Maria Corina Machado,
The internationally recognized Democratic leader and a 2025 Nobel Peace Prize winner in this scenario.
right, and Edmundo González Urrutia, who is widely believed to have been the actual winner of the suppressed 2024 election.
So the goal is not to invent a new government from scratch, but to unify and empower the legitimate political structures that, already exist in opposition.
Exactly. You're building on a foundation that already has a claim to democratic legitimacy. And this interim body must immediately focus on practical, non-political tasks. You have to build trust.
Like what? What's day one?
Day 1 is establishing massive, immediate humanitarian relief corridors. It's about getting food and medicine into the country now. It's about taking emergency measures to stabilize the catastrophic economic freefall. And crucially, the unconditional release of all political prisoners.
That would be a huge trust-building measure.
It's vital, and critically, to avoid becoming just a narrow political clique, the administration has to broaden its base. It has to include representatives from civil society, technocrats, the engineers and economists who know how to actually run things, moderate military elements who are willing to shift their allegiance, and members of the large-scale diaspora who fled.
Can I imagine international oversight has to be baked in from the absolute beginning?
It must. You need a referee. Oversight by multilateral bodies like the Organization of American States, the OAS, and the United Nations is essential. Their mandate would be twofold. First, to ensure financial transparency so aid money doesn't just, disappear.
As it has in the past.
As has in the past. And second, to deter revenge politics, to prevent the new government from immediately just locking up every former regime figure without due process, which would simply perpetuate the cycle of authoritarianism.
Okay, so that sets the immediate stage. But you can't build a new democracy on a foundation that's fundamentally rotten. How does the roadmap address the systemic decay that Maduro put in place?
That's the heavy lifting. And that leads to phase 2, the restoration of democratic institutions. This is structural work that has to happen in parallel with all the humanitarian efforts.
So tackling the courts, the Electoral Council.
All of it. The systematic dismantling of Maduro-era control over these core institutions is non-negotiable. The sources are absolutely clear. The judiciary, the Electoral Council, and the state media are the load-bearing pillars of the state. If they remain compromised, any future election is just illegitimate theater.
What does dismantling actually look like on the ground? It sounds incredibly complex and, probably prone to a lot of internal resistance.
It's hugely complex. It involves things like setting up high-level independent commissions, probably with international oversight, to review the current Supreme Court justices and Electoral Council members for complicity and corruption. It requires massive judicial reform assistance from partners like the U.S. and the EU, training for independent judges, establishing witness protection programs, modernizing court procedures.
So it's slow, meticulous, often invisible work.
Yes, but without it, the whole democratic house collapses again. It's the plumbing and wiring. You don't see it, but you can't live without it.
And the final goal, phase 3, is about anchoring this new order through a new social contract. What's the timeline proposed for something that huge?
The sources suggest a timeline that is aggressive, but it's historically informed. Phase 3. A clear path to elections and constitutional renewal should begin within 6 months of the interim government taking power.
6 months, that's fast.
It is. The immediate step is preparing for elections to a constituent assembly. So a body specifically tasked with rewriting social contract, the Constitution.
And what are the key areas this new constitution has to address to prevent, another Maduro from ever happening?
The analysts identify 4 crucial systemic failures that have to be fixed. First, reining in presidential term limits to prevent that kind of indefinite hold on power that Maduro and Chavez before him engineered.
Okay, that's a big one.
A huge one. Second, radically redefining civil-military relations, ensuring the armed forces are strictly subordinate to civilian authority and aren't, a parallel power structure.
Which they absolutely became.
They did. Third, reforming resource governance, creating transparent, audited mechanisms for the management of the vast oil wealth to ensure it actually benefits the people, not a corrupt cartel. And fourth, enshrining enforceable human rights protections.
And then, after that's all in place, you have the full elections.
The full presidential and legislative elections, which would anchor this new order in popular legitimacy, should then follow within 1 year.
That timeline, a year for a complete constitutional reset and a full election, is lightning speed. Is that realistic?
It's rapid, but the sources point to historical models. They look at the post-apartheid South Africa transition and the post-Pinochet Chile transition. In both cases, temporary governing structures like scaffolding allowed for national healing and fundamental restructuring to happen quickly.
So speed in this case is actually a form of political stability.
Exactly. You have to move fast enough to prevent opponents from mobilizing and to prevent chaos from taking root. You have to show momentum.
Okay, let's pivot to the immediate geopolitical fallout. The U.S. framed this as justice. How did the rest of the world react to the seizure of a sitting head of state?
The polarization was instant and severe, as you'd expect. On one side, regional partners like Brazil, Colombia, and the European Union were pretty quick to signal that they're ready to multilateralize the transition.
So they're offering aid, monitoring.
Substantial aid and monitoring, yes. And this is crucial for the U.S. It needs to avoid looking like a lone imperial power acting unilaterally. Getting the region on board is key to legitimacy.
But Maduro's backers, Russia, China, Cuba, they must have condemned the action outright.
They did, and very predictably. They immediately raised fears of diplomatic escalation. Russia and China framed it as a profound violation of international law, accusing the U.S. of unilateral aggression and setting a dangerous precedent for regime change.
So the risk now is that Venezuela becomes a geopolitical chessboard.
That's the exact phrase used in the analysis. A chessboard where these great powers replay old proxy conflicts, maybe using economic sanctions or even covert military support to remaining loyalist factions to undermine the transition.
This action, no matter how it was legally framed with the DOJ indictment, inevitably forces a confrontation with the fundamental concept of sovereignty.
It absolutely does.
Critics must be arguing that this violates the core principle of non-intervention.
This is the profound moral and legal gray zone that the sources spend a lot of time unpacking. Sovereignty, the idea that states have exclusive authority within their own borders, is the foundation of the modern global order. It's guaranteed by the UN Charter.
Right.
So critics argue that even the most corrupt government has the right to non-intervention. And if the U.S. can unilaterally seize one leader, who's safe next, where does it stop?
But the counterargument, which is central to the U.S. justification, challenges the very definition of what legitimate sovereignty even is.
Exactly. The counterargument states that sovereignty is not a blank check. It is not a license for mass repression, for narco-terrorism, and for the forced displacement of millions of your own citizens.
So when a regime crosses a certain line...
When a regime credibly crosses into state criminality, when it transforms itself into that cartel with flags, the moral calculus shifts. And this places Venezuela right at the heart of this tension between the sanctity of borders and the sanctity of human life. It forces the international system to confront whether extreme state failure and criminality can, in fact, negate the traditional norms of non-intervention.
And that's a debate that will rage for years in international legal circles.
Decades, probably.
A debate that may only be answered really by the underlying military reality. The ability to even execute this operation suggests a radical evolution in power projection.
It does. And that's the next big piece we have to break down.
The moment the news of the Caracas raid broke, analysts instinctively started drawing parallels to the most famous high-value target mission of the last generation, Operation Neptune Spear.
The 2011 raid in Abbottabad, Pakistan, that resulted in the death of Osama bin Laden. It's the immediate go-to comparison.
And on the surface, you can see why. The DNA looks similar. Both missions targeted these elusive high-value targets, or HVTs, deep inside sovereign territory, without the host nation's consent.
Right. Both were executed at night, and both were intended to send this profound message of capability and reach.
But our source material suggests that the difference between Neptune Spear and this new Operation Absolute Resolve is...
Well, it's the difference between a high-precision scalpel and an integrated, system-shocking sledgehammer.
That is the core doctrinal shift we absolutely have to analyze. Neptune Spear was the absolute pinnacle of post-9/11 counterterrorism. It was a specialized, minimalist, infiltration-focused raid. Absolute Resolve, 15 years later, was a demonstration of multi-domain power projection intended for state-level coercion.
Okay, so let's start with the similarities. What's the foundational DNA that defines both of these as elite special operations missions? Well, at the most basic level, both were intelligence-driven manhunts. They were anchored by direct presidential authority. You had Obama authorizing Neptune Spear and Trump authorizing Absolute Resolve.
And the complexity of the intelligence gathering. It must have been enormous in both cases.
Just immense. Both relied on persistent satellite surveillance, sophisticated signals intelligence, or SIGINT to map everything from guard rotations to command communications nodes, and of course, deep human intelligence networks, humans operating inside these tightly controlled, incredibly high-risk environments.
You can't just guess on a mission like this.
No. Targeting a figure like bin Laden or a sitting president requires absolute certainty, and that certainty only comes from fusing multiple redundant streams of data over a long period of time.
The choice of timing, the dead of night, was also shared. Neptune Spear launched just before midnight local time. Absolute Resolve was around 2 a.m.
And darkness is a tactical weapon for SOF. It's not just about hiding. It compresses the adversary's reaction time, it maximizes their confusion, and it provides this inherent advantage to highly trained forces who are equipped with advanced thermal and night vision optics. They own the night.
And the command structure was similar too, right? Both under JSOC.
Yes, both missions were executed under the Joint Special Operations Command umbrella, and both utilized the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the legendary Night Stalkers, for that low observable, high-risk insertion.
Okay, so that's the common ground. Now let's get into the divergence, where the technological gap of 15 years and the shift in strategic objective becomes crystal clear. Let's start with the most dramatic difference, the sheer scale and force deployed.
This is where the two missions just go in completely different directions. Neptune Spear was a masterpiece of deliberate restraint.
Minimalist by design.
Very. NS used only 2 primary stealth helicopters for the insertion team, plus a couple of Chinooks for backup. There were no massed air assets, no pre-planned airstrikes. The overriding strategic constraint was avoiding escalation with Pakistan, a nuclear-armed state. They were trying to whisper in a hostile environment.
Absolute Resolve, in contrast, shouted. The scale embraced total battle space dominance, or what the military calls overmatch.
The reports circulating from defense sources are just astonishing. They describe an aerial armada exceeding 150 aircraft.
150.
Yeah. I mean, that's a scale that's usually reserved for the opening hours of a major conventional war, like the invasion of Iraq. It's not for a surgical short-duration raid to extract 2 people.
And that just underscores the strategic shift, doesn't it? The objective wasn't quiet infiltration.
No, it was instantaneous, overwhelming coercion designed to completely paralyze the target state's entire defense system for a very short, very violent window of time.
Okay, let's break down that armada, because for a listener, 150 aircraft is just an abstract number. What specific roles did these assets play in securing the airspace over Caracas for, what, a 45-minute mission?
It was a layered symphony of military power, a really complex system. At the highest level, the top cover, you had the stealth dominance provided by F-22 Raptors and F-35 Lightning II.
Their job wasn't to bomb, though.
Not at all. Their role was to secure the air. They act as a counter-air screen, totally invisible to Venezuelan radar, ready to eliminate any of their aging fighters that would have dared to scramble. They established almost instantly this bubble of total air superiority over the capital.
Okay, so the skies are clear. Then you have the heavy bombers, the B-52 and the B-1 Lancer. Their presence is usually associated with, massive destruction.
And here they represent calibrated potential force. They were reportedly positioned for very limited, extremely precision strikes against specific, high-threat perimeter defenses, known radar sites, key anti-aircraft batteries, or major command bunkers near the capital.
So their presence alone was a deterrent.
It was a message. It signaled overwhelming capability, ensuring that any attempt at a meaningful, coordinated response by Maduro's loyalists would be instantly and violently neutralized.
And then you have the crucial command and control, the C2 and the intelligence layer, which is managing this whole complex system in real time.
That layer is the brain of the operation. You had E-3 AYCS aircraft circling high above, providing that airborne command and control, coordinating the movements of all 150 aircraft simultaneously. They're the air traffic controller for the entire battle.
And alongside them, the intelligence planes.
Yes, the RC-135 rivet joint planes. You can think of a rivet joint as a massive flying vacuum cleaner for signals intelligence. It just hoovers up every electronic emission, every radio transmission, every radar pulse, every cell phone ping in real time.
Which gives them immediate warning of any enemy reaction.
It's faster than immediate. So if a Venezuelan general tried to issue a command to scramble troops, the rivet joint would hear it, and AI would analyze it, and the AYCS would reroute the insertion helicopters before that order even reached the loyalist troops on the ground.
That instantaneous information fusion is what creates the denied battle space we talked about.
Precisely. And complementing this, you had a screen of MQ-9 Reaper drones providing constant high-definition thermal and full-motion video overwatch. They're feeding real-time images of the target compound and the surrounding streets directly to the operators on the ground and the commanders in the air.
So no surprises.
The goal is to eliminate surprises, yes.
Yeah.
To minimize the chances of the extraction team running into an unforeseen ambush.
And finally, the insertion assets themselves. The MH-60 Blackhawks and MH-47 Chinooks from the Night Stalkers. They're all operating under this massive protective umbrella.
And there was naval support, too. The naval component was critical for extraction and for logistics. Reports detail an amphibious assault ship positioned out in the Caribbean, acting as a forward floating base. It's ready to receive the high-value detainees and the extraction teams quickly and get them out of the area.
And other ships.
You had surface combatants, like destroyers, enforcing the air exclusion zone from the sea, and reportedly at least one submarine conducting covert reconnaissance and possibly acting as a signal relay. The entire operation was a demonstration of America's industrial capacity to project force, all in the service of enforcing a criminal indictment.
Which leads us to the second major divergence. The objective. Neptune Spear was a kill mission. Absolute Resolve was a capture mission. Why is this difference so strategically critical?
It signals a profound evolution in strategy, from counterterrorism to something new. Bin Laden was killed and his body was very rapidly buried at sea. The goal there was elimination, tactical denial, and preventing him from becoming a martyr figurehead. The logic was pure counterterrorism.
Maduro, on the other hand, was captured alive, along with his wife, and extracted for a trial in the U.S.
And this elevates the goal from simple elimination to one of legal accountability, of public spectacle, and of systemic regime disruption. When you capture a head of state accused of narco-terrorism and you put him in a foreign courtroom, the impact is sustained and it's global.
As the sources note, a courtroom speaks for years, unlike a grave.
It's a perfect summary. A trial puts the entire cartel with flags model, the systemic corruption, the illicit networks, the money laundering, the human rights abuses on global display for months or even years.
And that visibility is a form of deterrence in itself, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a powerful signal to other hybrid threat regimes, those who rely on blending state power with criminal enterprise, that legal immunity is not guaranteed by a title or a palace. It's a message that the long arm of U.S. criminal justice can now, theoretically, reach into the most fortified places on Earth.
It turns the former leader into a witness against his own system.
It does. It forces a public reckoning.
Okay, the third, and arguably most important divergence, is the technological leap. You said Neptune Spear used stealth and basic night vision. Absolute resolve showcased the denser web of modern multi-domain operations.
We're talking about multi-domain operations, or MDO, and that just means warfare fought simultaneously across the physical domain, the digital domain, which is cyber, and the electromagnetic spectrum, or EW. This integration is what made the scale of absolute resolve both manageable and so decisive.
So the 15 years between the operations saw technology move from being, a sophisticated tool to being the absolute foundation of the operation itself.
It became the nervous system of the operation.
Let's get into the specifics of how cyber warfare was used, not just as like a support function, but as a kinetic enabler during the raid itself.
This is where that quiet paralysis began before the first shot was fired. Defense analysts confirm that cyber and electronic warfare were deliberate instruments of tactical coercion. They were used to disrupt sections of the national power grid.
Causing rolling, targeted power outages.
Targeted is the key word, specifically in critical areas, like near major military installations or known loyalist troop concentrations in Caracas.
So the resulting darkness and confusion, that wasn't just a collateral effect of the chaos. It was an engineered condition designed to slow down the regime's response.
Precisely. The power outages reduced their situational awareness. It forced them to rely on backup generators and pre-digital command systems, and all of that just buys the insertion team precious, precious minutes.
And then there's the electronic warfare piece.
In parallel, electronic warfare EW assets were deployed, jamming Venezuelan military radar and communication systems across a wide frequency range. This instantly created that denied battle space we mentioned, degrading the ability of the remaining Venezuelan command structure to coordinate any kind of coherent response. And you achieve all that without having to drop a single bomb on their bases.
So this combination, cyber disruption, EW paralysis, and kinetic overmatch, is what allowed that small SOF team to maintain that fleeting moment of relative superiority.
It was a technological symphony, and it was all fused with AI-enabled data integration, things like synthetic aperture radar and thermal fusion systems that were linking all 150 of those aircraft and the ground forces in real time. This level of networking allows commanders to shrink the decision cycle.
The OD loop. Observe, orient, decide, act.
The ODA loop, exactly. The time between sensing an enemy move and responding to it, they shrink that from hours to mere seconds. And that assures that the SOF team is always operating faster, always inside the enemy's ability to react.
So politically, what is the lasting precedent from all this? Neptune Spear, it led to tension with Pakistan, but it was generally accepted globally as legitimate counterterrorism against a non-state actor.
Absolute resolve is far more volatile. Targeting a sitting head of state raises profound constitutional questions within the U.S. itself about the extent of executive war-making authority without explicit congressional approval.
Right. Supporters will cite the DOJ indictment as the ultimate legal ground.
But critics will argue this operation effectively bypasses the traditional checks and balances on military force. It blurs the line between law enforcement and an act of war.
The major precedent, then, is the normalization of unilateral intervention against a state-embedded threat.
That is the signal being sent globally. This may mark a shift toward a world where the U.S. is willing to project power to, in effect, redefine the rules of confrontation with regimes that blend political power and high-level criminality. If Neptune's Spear closed the door on the era of large-scale terrorist manhunts, absolute resolve kicks open the door to a new era of technologically driven, integrated state coercion in the gray zone.